Now, I'm not going to go too crazy in depth about explaining what all the basses do, as there's several of them here, and this isn't really a how to make a dubstep song or how to make a dubstep bass video. It's more about constructing the song and then mixing it down. What I will say is that I've added processing to several of the basses. You can see on this one there's actually no processing. This one was actually resampled. I made the bass in an earlier Ableton instance. I think I actually took this from an earlier song I made and then pitched it up. And this is something that I recommend very heavily when you're making songs, is to take your basses and bounce them down, as very complex sound design can really eat up your CPU and make your computer run slow when you're trying to work. And audio files can be more easy to manage when it comes to volume and cutting up the sounds. Like if you're making a bass with vocoders and a lot of crazy effects going on, there might be a lot of feedback that happens at the end, sort of a weird trail sound, and if you bounce it down to audio, it's easier to remove that. The only real disadvantage to bouncing down your basses into audio is that you lose a lot of control of changing the way they sound, and pitching them up with time stretching can sound kind of weird if you pitch them up too much. Like if I take this bass and I pitch it up to 24, that doesn't sound very good. Although you can actually get some very interesting effects from time stretching if you experiment with it, but I'll put it back at +4 semitones. Let's look at a couple other sounds. We've got this one, has some OTT and some reverb. Just adding some more dimension to the sound. In a lot of my release songs, the processing tends to get a little bit more heavy than this, but for a song that's simple like this, it's not really that necessary. We got just OTT on this bass, no reverb. Kind of similar to the 2-vein bass that we made in an earlier video. We've got a growl. This has a vocoder on it and some OTT and reverb. The vocoder's kind of adding that valley sound, which is really good. And then there's this growl, which I made in Serum. If you haven't noticed, basically all of these basses came from Serum. And then I bounced it down again to save on CPU space, and there was a little bit of feedback at the end. You can see that I removed that with a fade. And the last bass we're going to look at is kind of a filler sound. You can see I just called it filler. And this is a relatively basic sound, not much to it. Just very plain kind of growly sound. And you may have noticed that it's significantly more quiet than the other sounds. This is because during the drop, I actually have a section where it plays part of the melody that I have going on in the verses for a quick little break. And when you're doing that with your songs, when you take parts of the melody and put them into the drop, you want to add little parts of bass to them to keep the edge of the drop intact. You can hear how that sounds right here. If we take that out, and it's a lot more plain. The reason why we're taking a part from the verse's melody and putting it into the drop is to add a more consistent feel to the song. When you're making music and you have elements of a song which just come and go at random and they never reoccur, the songs can feel like they're haphazardly constructed, almost like you're doing something on the fly. And it's not very fun to listen to, especially in electronic music, where repetition can sometimes be necessary. To give the song a more consistent feel, we take parts of the melody and interspice them into the drop, so there's something predictable for the listeners to hear, and the songs don't feel improvised and random like if we just had ideas that come and never do anything. After the drop, we go into another verse section, so I'm just going to call this verse 2. Now this is where the construction of the song can vary depending on what you're trying to make. You might want to go into a complete breakdown, and then have a part that's similar to this verse, and then go into a breakdown / build up, and then into a drop, instead of heading just straight into a verse. And you might also want to make a drop that's shorter by cutting out the second half, and then going straight into the verse if you want a very streamlined song. But for this song, we'll go back into another verse after the second half of the first drop,